problem is never the technologies. The problem is always the human interface, like engineers call it. So saying that you can always find the experts who will tell you what are the best technologies to use for whatever you want to do. And but then to lead the change, to understand that whatever new tools you're introducing to the organization, and I'm really wanting to emphasize here that it really doesn't matter what kind of technology. You need to understand that all kinds of technologies are new tools. So when you introduce them, to be able to think about the change that they create so that you understand that it's not enough to think about them. It's like dropping a stone into the water. It's not enough to think about the first ring or the second. You need to think fourth, fifth, sixth, all the way, because it will change and have impact on your whole organization. And this kind of thinking, I don't see very widely yet. And that kind of thinking is what you need to tackle the human interface problem.
Hertta, I want to come back to one of the ideas that you brought out on stage, the critical thinking, one of the two things that you've mentioned. So you pointed out that for us it's very important now to have this critical thinking, not in broad sense, but basically to look at the changes that we have at the moment, to look on which direction we go in terms of future of work, and to distinguish between facts and stories. Could you explain a bit and give you maybe an example how it happens?
Yeah, it's my favorite tool. I like to think of theories and theoretical approaches as, in the best case scenarios, they work as thinking tools. And when I speak, I always introduce like some kinds of tools to think with, and that's what I used here today. And often, that's my favorite tool. The way it works is basically you can use it on individual, organizational, or societal level. You take yourself, you can look at the way you work, your working day, your tasks, the way you like to do things. And a lot of it, if you would, for instance, be interviewed, you would present to me as facts about your work, right? I need to do this, I need to do that, I cannot do this, I cannot do that. That's how people talk. Interestingly, quite often we talk in dichotomies when it comes to work. You know, like what things are this or they're that. They're not both and. Even if we now see that the change is driving things more towards the both and in every way. But back to your own work. So what I mean by these facts as stories is that if looking at your own work and actually trying to detect that, is this really the only way I can do this, as in a fact? Or is it just my story that's convenient for me for XYZ reasons, and that's why I'm hanging into it? I'll give you a concrete example. I used myself. I used to think that I can only write scientific text if I have 2 to 3 days alone. So I was using it as an excuse to say that I can't really write that much because it's hard to organize that much time. Then I became a mother. And had a baby, I realized that I can actually write for 15 minutes in the cupboard at the time, and it's quite productive in the end of the day. But I just didn't want to, I didn't want to give up the old fact because it was convenient, and writing is something that I've experienced as hard. So as always, we don't like to do things that are a bit difficult for us. We like to do things that are easy and low-hanging fruit, if you like. So that's one way everyone could start looking at their jobs and work tasks and start from something and ask that, particularly if you have something that you think is absolutely critical to do like this, then there's usually some kind of emotional story behind it, and very seldom they're actually facts. Well, if I bring it to organizational level, during Corona, I was speaking in many organizations in Finland. Everywhere I went, doesn't matter what kind of business, they all met me with this story. And it was like this. Yes, here before Corona, we had a fact, and I'm showing with my fingers that not a fact, but like a joint shared story that we called a fact, that, for instance, you cannot sell anything to a customer unless you're face-to-face. You need that energy. Well, then Corona happened, and they had to sell via Teams or Zoom or whatever, and they discovered that it works okay. It might not be the perfect way to do it, but it worked okay. And many facts were actually turned, like people realized they were just stories. And this, in all of the front-running organizations, they turned into a thinking tool. So they started asking questions about everything they do. That is this really a fact, like we thought about selling or something else? Or And rather than, for instance, thinking again back to what I said about dichotomies, rather than thinking that do we do this virtually or do we do this face-to-face, asking what are we doing? Questioning a bit, particularly when you meet something like, oh, we've always done it like that. And asking, really, is that the best way? Is that why you, or maybe there's another way of restructuring this? And now, the more we see this in research on work globally, like in Harvard, there's interesting research where they say that we should be looking at the office as a tool. Not asking that, do you want to be there or do you not want to be there? But rather, what are you doing today? Do you need to be at home or do you need to be at the office? And starting from the quality of work and, your own well-being, ability to focus, for instance, etc. So the thinking tool, you can apply it to anything. But I would be particularly interested and vigilant about sort of mythical things or things that people are very, very protective or hard about. Then it can be hard to get to them. Because as you know, in organizations, the sort of shared stories and the shared facts are often the ones that people don't want to give up. And as I said in my speech, I'm not arguing that you need to give up all of your shared facts. I'm saying that in the interest of working in a more sustainable manner and restructuring our working life, using these technologies rather than letting them use us, we would have to ask a lot more questions.
Yeah, I think that the main idea would be probably to see if we can reach the result easily or not. And if the result comes in a difficult way, then to revisit every element on the way. Yeah, because we have so many things changed. It's not only a hybrid way of working, it's also workforce, So there are so many stories that companies are telling themselves. Let's say we need only Lithuanians, we can hire only Lithuanians. They need to be full-time, they need to be on office, they need to be outside, they need to speak this, they need to know that, but actually, do they?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. And I was actually a few weeks ago in Turku in Finland in this interesting Work 2023 conference. And I was listening to a research by a young PhD student who's been interviewing hundreds of people in Finland about part-time work and full-time work. And it turns out that 70% of people said that they would actually rather work part-time because the flexibility that I was referring to in my speech is something that we all need in this midst of this growing demands from every end. But they also reported that it's difficult to part-time job has a bit of a stigma in Finland. It's not it's also economically maybe not possible to live in the capital area, but also that the people who have part-time jobs, according to the research, was seen as a bit like, oh well, something wrong with you because you only work part-time. Can you not get a full-time job? And here we are exactly what you were just saying, that our thinking when it comes to work is so often this really dichotomous. You're a full-time job or a part-time job, or you're an employee or you're an entrepreneur. And what I'm arguing with my colleagues and seeing more and more is that we need to go towards the both and think that it's okay. So unpack that fact and say that it's perfectly okay. In fact, it's good for all of us if you have, say that the imaginary situation that you have some kind of stable income from some kind of employment, so that you make just enough money. You don't have to worry about which you can pay your food and your apartment. But then you can do other things. You can be an entrepreneur and make jewelry if that gives you satisfaction as something that you like doing, and you can be an employee and an entrepreneur, and it shouldn't be a problem to any organization. Yet we see, like you said, in organizations in Lithuania, in Finland, we're really stuck in the ways of thinking of what an employee should look like, how long they should be employed, where should they come from, what language they must speak. And like you said, many of those facts, the musts, actually with closer inspection, you could probably say that, both and would work as well.
You've mentioned now that we are going to live longer and work longer. Yeah. And one of the messages that you gave that we are not ready for that.
No. Our systems are built around a certain life expectancy, a certain kind of job, a certain kind of way of thinking about employment. And it's not sustainable. You cannot, simple example, a knowledge worker with these tools that we now have, like working, for instance, with ChatGPT as your assistant, that takes away the simple tasks. We know from brain research that people can do hard cognition jobs for 2 to 4 hours a day. Now, if we were clever, if we would have already gone further with our adaptation, we would have started rethinking our working day, restructuring it. You would, if you're a people manager, you would say that I don't want you to sit in front of your computers for 8 hours a day. It's not going to be your most efficient, productive working time.
Yep.
But I would rather that if you need to think of new ideas, go for walks. You know, go to the forest, let your brain rest a bit, read something, then take a break. Like thinking in terms of like changing the way we think about time and the way we think about efficiency, the way we think about rewarding. Like before, the way we worked, the technologies weren't as able, they didn't challenge us the same way. The challenge was different. Now the challenge is that what do you do and what does the machine do?
Yep.
And what we should then ask is that what should be the implications of what the working day should look like? Mm-hmm. For instance, from this perspective, the question, the debate over how long the working week is, that's kind of pointless. It will change. We're going to move to a more flexible way of looking at work, where I'm now going with the Stanford colleagues that we need to look at life more holistically. Mm-hmm. And understand that different phases of life are not a problem at work, but something that we can actually accommodate for, and look at people's skills and abilities at different stages of life, like flexibly, and think about, like, for instance, this notion that you are completely used because it's your time to retire is kind of ludicrous. There are lots of people who are older who would still like to work in one way or another. And I don't really understand if they want to rest and don't want to work, fine. But if somebody would still like to do something, why can't we figure out part-time solutions? And I think forerunners have done that. So it's like, what I may be trying to say in a very long-winded way is that we have such set ways of looking at employment and HR systems and HR practices and leadership behaviors. And what does it mean to be at work? We're really, really stuck in our facts. And I would really think that all the research information I have speaks for the need for unpacking them, asking for new kind of facts, new kind of stories. Some things are going to stay, but some things could change already now. And so I have a hard time of suggesting the time frame when things are going to change in a more fundamental way, but it's inevitable.
Jūs klausite podcast'o Žmogiškieji Iššūkiai. Kad nepraleistumėte naujų epizodų, kviečiame prenumeruoti laidos naujienlaiškį adresu žmogiškieji.lt. Podcast'ą prenumeruoti taip pat galite per Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher ir kitose platformose. Laidos partneris Audioteka verslui. Nuolatinio tobulėjimo kultūra jūsų organizacijoje. www.audiotekaverslui.lt